Tafoya-Monroe. Today we're going to call this episode Restored Soul. Psalm 23:3, He restores my soul. And my guest that I have with us today is Jeff Fellman. So welcome, Jeff. Let me just give you a little history about him and why we're calling this Restored Soul is because he created this amazing workbook called Soul Restored, and it is based off of Psalm 23. I want to give a little bio about you, if you don't mind, because there's a lot here. So Jeff is a Master of Divinity from Ashbury Theological Seminary. He pastored Christian churches for about 12 years. He was a high-profile child abuse investigator in Arizona, conducting over 1,500 investigations. During that time, Jeff also opened 2 Christian faith-based mental health centers, but most recently, he directed a statewide therapeutic foster care program here in Arizona. He is a trauma specialist. But most of all, you know, he's a father, and he's a very good father to 5 children. And, you know, we say hurt people, and when we have horrible childhoods, usually we do end up bringing back that generational stuff into our own families. And I know for both of us, we did that a little bit, but at the end of the day, God restored us, and we can say that we are the children that God called us to be.
That's right.
So welcome.
That's right. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yes.
So we met about probably when did you start this?
Maybe 3 years ago.
Okay, so about 3 years ago. However God connected us, He connected us, and Jeff reached out to me in the beginning stages of this. I had the privilege of looking through this and was so honored because obviously I was a nobody who you thought was somebody special, so I appreciated that you gave me that credit. But this book, I know, talks about everything that you've been through and how God has walked you through that restoration. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your past and some of the stuff that you went through?
Okay. The premise of this workbook is that our story, our life story, is our ministry. And God wants us to own that and realize the healing in each area and then be able to give that healing away to others. So you want to know a little bit about my childhood?
I do, because you know, I have so much respect. Even though I've gone through a lot, I know so many people have gone through so much more. And it has not been an easy healing journey. And I've been pretty consistent 7 years going after stuff. So when I hear somebody who has a lot of trauma and tragedy like yourself, I just commend you for not only doing the work, but continuing to allow God to restore you to who you were created to be.
Yes.
So yes, please share with us.
Okay. I grew up in Pipestone, Minnesota, small town. Dad, truck driver. Mom worked for the family doctor. And the church missed our family. Our family was broken. My dad was an alcoholic. He beat my mother up night after night. Many visits to the hospital where she would tell us she fell down the stairs. He beat my little brother and I, sexually abused for a couple of years by a neighbor. When I was 13, my dad committed suicide on Mother's Day with me in the living room. And my little brother was 11, and the next thing that happened was that little brother committed suicide when he was 17 and I was 19. I was in college at that point, and my older brother was murdered in Kansas City. He was 33 and I was 27. At that time I was in seminary. And I went through and collected all of his things, drove him up to Minnesota, and preached his funeral. Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? Which I think is pretty much on the mind of almost everyone, you know. It was a hard decision at that time. Do I go right into ministry, or do I just kind of, you know, push away and try to find out, you know, what's going on?
Well, that's a lot. And how old were you at this time?
I was 27.
So, but the age of 27, you've already witnessed abuse with your mom and dad. I know that you also talk about there's a lot of mental abuse by your father, where he put a lot on you as a little child of like, you're my favorite son, you know, and that's just so much for a child to carry, of, you know, probably feeling responsible. And I don't know if he did any mind games of like, you know, this is your fault or anything like that. But my question is, did you name that that funeral service that name because were you questioning God?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I could see that.
And that's the first chapter, is putting all of our suffering and our pain under the supervision of God. Because most of the time, what we do is we turn away from God and try to figure it out. So the first chapter in here is just, how do we lament? How do we bring the pain? How do we update our faith in God to include our pain?
Yeah.
Because people kind of see them as separate.
Yeah.
And people need to be turned back. And my concern, you know, the reason I did this in my life calling is, I sang in the choir. I was president of the youth group in church. My mom was directing the choir. My dad was falling off the pew up in the balcony. We'd get home and, you know, a lot of violence. And then throughout, you know, as I grew older, there was really no place I could find in the church that I could feel safe enough to talk about what had happened in my life.
Yeah.
So I feel passionate about creating a safe place in the church for people, and not just to get healed, but to get equipped by their own story.
Yeah. Yes.
To help others.
Yes.
So,
Thank you. And because of what you and I have gone through, just like you said, our passion, you know, and not that my passion is not for man and not that your passion is not for women, but obviously when we've gone through something and we know that there is a solution, we want to give that to everyone. And we've kind of done the hard work, and yours is harder than mine because I've only been on a 7-year journey and yours has been way longer than that. But when we know, like, oh, wow, I did not realize that. I did not realize I was mad at God. I did not realize that God did not make my dad do the things he did. God did not make my ex-husband have an affair.
Right.
And when you can actually, like you said, realize that it's separate, because we do kind of put it all together of like, if you're a good God, why would you allow this to happen? I was the innocent little girl. You were an innocent little boy.
Right.
So then our passion becomes for to give other people that information for their own personal healing.
That's right.
Yeah.
And to help them bring Jesus into that pain.
Yeah.
One of the things I like to say is that Jesus is a time traveler. You know, the Bible says that he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so he can go right back to any age, right back to any place in our life. We can bring him in and we can talk to him. It's good to have somebody with you to kind of help you
facilitate.
Facilitate. But we need to get used to that type of conversation with the Lord and make friends with our healing instead of run away from it, which is especially true for men. I just, my heart is that men are not, they're not opening up.
Well, they're not
using
nurtured.
their power. They're not unleashed.
Yeah. Well, they're not nurtured from a very young age, and especially in yours and my day. You know, Michael and I just watched a show the other day, and it was based in the 80s, and the little boy's, it was actually the everlasting story. The boy's mom had died. He had woke up and told the dad, I had a dream about mom last night, and the dad's like, son, like, we need to move on. Like, you need to grow up. I mean, he's like a 7-year-old little kid, 8. You need to grow up. We need to move on with our life. And then he went in to condemn him, that he sees that his grades are dropping. He sees that he's not doing this and not doing that. And for the most of us, that's how we were raised.
Right.
You know, so men did not get nurtured. And if you cried, you're a sissy, you know, and if you were a manly man, then you're a mama's boy. And so most men have withheld any type of emotion. And the hard part is our relationship with God is emotional. Jesus is so loving and caring, and when you actually feel that love, you just start crying. And the thing that touched me the most in this book is when Michael and I first started dating, you know, I had never had a healthy relationship with a man. And the Lord had said to me, you know, rather than thinking that pleasing him sexually would be the best thing for this relationship, why don't you go wash his feet? And so that's the part that actually, when I read in here, made me cry. And so do you mind telling us a little bit about that story? Because
Sure.
was that a breakthrough for you?
Well, it was a breakthrough emotionally.
Okay.
When my brother committed suicide, I went into a shell. I was 19. I was going to be a doctor, but I decided at that point, if some people, why do I want to learn to fix bruises and things like that when some people don't even want to live? So I really recommitted my life at age 23 then.
Okay.
But during that time, between 19 and 23, I was completely shut down. One morning, I started to pray with about 20 men. And every morning, about 6:30. So this morning I had stinky feet, and I'd been running and rowing a boat on the Mississippi, and I came to the prayer meeting, and one of the guys that I didn't know very well, who ended up being my best man at my wedding eventually, came over to me and he said, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I really feel like God is telling me to wash your feet. So it did sound crazy. So I went and, and I slinked down on the wall, and he came and with a bowl and washed my feet. And then he read Jeremiah 29, verse 11 through 13, which you probably all know that verse. It's one of all of our favorites.
Yeah.
And it's become one of the important verses in my life. But a few days later, the way prayer was is people would walk around, they would read their Bible, they'd sit down. Every now and then the man with the guitar would just work up a song, and we'd all just start singing, and then we'd all go back to our own thing, And a few days later, I just felt it coming, and I went over to this man. His name was Jeff too.
Okay,
that's the way God works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I just buried my face in his shoulder, and I just started heaving and weeping. And that was, I don't know that I'd cried. I don't think I'd cried, I don't know, since since my dad died when I was 13.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay.
And I had a lot happen, between those years.
Yeah. Okay.
And I still see this, that when you create a safe environment, we just had this happen. In fact, he wouldn't even mind me telling you this story. One of the pastors of my church.
Okay.
One of the young men in his family, his son has a mental illness. He's bipolar.
Okay.
And the family's been kind of terrorized by not knowing when he'll have an episode, and then he'll go off, on a family member.
Okay.
And I started working with him and created a safe place for him and validated the trauma he has just by having that mental illness.
Okay.
And he just became unguarded because nobody had said, wow, look at the trauma you must have to face. Having to deal with that and then be out of control and then have to pick up the pieces afterwards. So that led to a family session where everybody just shared, safe, prayed, cried. And then the pastor, one of the pastors who, everyone just goes to, he's like a rock, he was on the couch, and he kind of fell off the couch onto his knees, and he just wailed. He cried. His tears, I don't know how long those tears have been in there. But I'm finding when people validate the unresolved pain that they have, the unresolved issues, and they know a way they can become not scared of it. And they can welcome it as an opportunity for God to heal. Instead of run from that. I think we're all getting triggered, one way or another every day. It's like, all of a sudden we have these feelings or this body reaction or this nervousness and most of the time we don't, we're uncomfortable with that. We don't know what to do with it.
We don't even know what, someone that's walking around with a constant chronic anxiety, God did not create you that way. Where did it come from? And you have to go to that place, and you have to be willing. And there's so much shame. And I shouldn't be feeling this way. I think even in your book, you said, you would sit in church and be like, am I the only one feeling this way? I have to be, because you were living in that constant, anxiety, depression, because you're not whole if you're living in the trauma. You're actually stuck. And what was coming to my mind was Pastor Sangoon, which is a really good friend of both of ours, and that he always says in trauma healing that you don't say what's wrong with you, you say what happened to you. And just like you said, when that validates someone, to give them an opportunity, we can see something's going on. Let's talk about it. Let's go there instead of stigmatizing it or straighten up, boy, you need to get it together, you know, don't cry, to actually go there and talk about it. And I love when men cry, because I feel that our families are so broken, and I know that it starts with the man being able to be the head of the household, but without him being healed and whole in his identity of who he's supposed to be, he really can't lead a household. He can't raise the kids the way that they need to be raised. And so moving from that, because I think I got us off tracks. So when you got your feet washed, that was a breaking point for you. And that is when you kind of opened up like a river.
Yeah, but it wasn't, you know,
It was
anywhere
just the
near,
beginning. It's just the
anywhere near
beginning.
started, right.
Well, there has to start somewhere.
And that's what I see, is that, especially men again, because women are more welcoming to relationship, I think, and healing and information. But
Talking
I
about
just see
feelings.
so many, generally in the church, but men especially, that just shut down and stuff things. And I pray that it becomes the norm that men take the lead in knowing that true masculinity is spiritual.
Yeah,
It's when
yes.
we can be relational and learn how to you know, work with our feelings and how to share and make safe places for other people to share.
Yes.
And we need tools, and you know, that's what I'm trying to give here. But it takes courage to own our story.
Yeah.
It takes courage to look at the things that have happened to us, bring God into them, and turn the mess into a message.
Yeah.
You know, like you've heard.
Amen.
heard say
Amen. There's like
before.
3 things. My brain's going all over the place because this is so exciting. Is the first thing I felt is that so first of all, when we're raised in religion, we aren't really even taught about having a personal relationship with Jesus. So like with my healing ministry, when I work with people, it is, like you said earlier, bringing Jesus into the situation. And what popped into my head, and I just went through a healing situation myself, is that if you look at something through the pain and trauma, or the lens of pain and trauma, you actually feel the emotions, and that's where the anxiety comes up, that's where the fear comes up, the PTSD, the triggers, because you're in the emotions. So when I went through this healing process, you know, obviously I invited Jesus into that, what was hurting my heart and my soul. And I was telling Michael about it. I couldn't see Jesus, but I knew he was here, and he was just speaking to me, telling me everything that I needed to hear. He was helping me understand it, and the peaceness and the calmness, when you can understand it from a heaven's view, changes everything.
Yeah.
It's still the same situation. It's still the same circumstances, but in my own hurt, pain, flesh, it's too much. I can't handle it. I can't deal with it. I can't even focus on it. But when Jesus comes, it's like almost like talking somebody of going, okay, we're going to go to the store. There might be, it's a pet store. There might be some dogs barking. So I'm just preparing you for it. You already know the reality. Even if you get there, you still hear the dogs barking. It might amp you up if you're scared of dogs, but you got prepared for it. So what I was seeing in this healing was that if I can see it from heaven's standpoint, I can actually move forward in a healed way of helping not only myself heal, but everybody else in my family heal as well. So when you're saying inviting Jesus into it, how did you learn that?
Well, the 3rd chapter in here is about identity.
Yeah.
So it's really important. One of the keys to be able to do that is to not look at our life through our own experience, but look at it through God's word, through His filter. Right. How would God see that? How does God see me? Who am I with? Am I my life experience?
Yeah.
Or am I how God sees me?
Right.
When you can access that, then you're able to bring the two together. But if I try to face that without God, without His filter, you know, without it coming through that filter of who I am in Him, well, then I'm no match. Because we don't really, and that's where the enemy can jump on, because you know, I don't believe a Christian can be possessed, but I know that every lie, every place, every agreement, there are spirits that attach. And so when I work with people, that's the last thing we do. But we look at open doors to the past generations. Then we look at the curses or the lies that we live out. Then we do soul hurts and healings. And then we do, we just tell you don't have to yell. You just tell them to
Yeah,
leave.
you just tell them to leave. So let me break that down for any non-Christians, because obviously this airs on Facebook, and I have probably a lot of friends that don't understand. So what the Lord's been really showing me is I talk Christianese. And so because I've gone through so much healing and you've gone through so much healing, it just sounds normal. But what I want to break down is the understanding is when we don't know our identity, and we are all created in the image of God, and God created us in his image, which means we're perfect. And we are whole beings in him, no matter what happens. But we, in our pains, hurts, and traumas, we make agreements. Like in your circumstance, I'll just use myself. In my circumstance, I was a bad girl. I was unloved. My dad didn't love me, rejected, abandoned. Gosh, there's so many. And it's so funny when I start to try to go down and I can't remember them. But when you're in the pain and hurt, you're just like, oh, nobody loves me. So I was this broken little girl who, okay, not only did my dad leave me, but my husband cheated on me. So there's something wrong with me because I'm looking through my hurt and pain. When I go to Jesus and he walks me through it and shows me, your dad left because of his own hurt and pain. Your dad was an alcoholic because of his own hurt and pain. It had nothing to do with you as a little girl. Your ex-husband cheated on you because of his own hurt and pain. It wasn't because you weren't pretty enough. It wasn't because you weren't a good enough wife. And so when you can understand and take responsibility of like, I'm only responsible for myself, I'm not responsible for other people, in that healing, we can walk in that strength of the identity who God called us to be.
Accepted, loved, approved.
Yes.
All the things that we didn't get.
Yes.
And,
Not perfect.
and it's going to be Father's Day, right?
Yes.
In 2 days.
Yes.
And so I'm just hoping that, even with my father, who did a lot of things that were hurtful. And he did. He said, "You're my favorite son," which, was hurtful. I didn't realize it at the time. But the way it became hurtful was that he kept telling me he was going to die soon, and that he wanted me to take care of the family.
Yeah.
And I was 8 years old.
That is not
And so then
okay.
over and over, he'd wake me up and cry and tell me that I was going to take care of the family. So that has created kind of a pressure all my life to, and so I've needed to shut that door and renounce the curse or whatever that I'm supposed to save. Although I've had to learn the difference between helping and trying to rescue, because of that.
Yes, people pleasing, all the things.
But one thing I want to say is that even when our dads, they hurt sometimes, they hurt us, but there is something that we did get. And my dad said I was his favorite, and the positive side of that for me has been that I have felt the favor of God all my life.
That's good.
And I think, God redeems, even the things that became hurtful, underlying a lot of our, in our life. I mean, so yeah, God redeems it all.
He does. And again, back to like when we say remove a demon or something like that. So it's an agreement. It's like we have good and bad, light and dark. So in the good, God calls you a good son. In the bad, your dad placed something on you. And as an 8-year-old, you agreed with it. In order for me to be the favorite son, I have to now be the man of the house. I'm 8 years old. That's a lot of responsibility now you don't get to be a child. You don't have to have a childhood. So when we say release you from that or close the door, it's getting Jeff to the point of realizing that should have never been put on you, helping you to unagree with it by bringing Jesus in and showing you that was never meant for you. It was never meant for you to carry. And that's what we mean by breaking it off or closing a door or unagreeing with it, because that's where the healing can begin. The healing I always say you can't heal what you don't reveal. So a lot of us walk in the hurt and pain that we keep inside. It's a secret, or, you know, especially molestation with men. And that's why thank you so much, because you don't want to talk about that. It's shameful, you know, even though you didn't do anything. But for one man to see one man talk about it, because I know so many men out there are struggling and suffering with even their sexual identity, of the confusion of, you know, I can't even imagine what it does to the brain. I know through the trauma, there's splitting, there's all kinds of things just to survive through that trauma. And so again, I love that you're willing to work with men. I thank you so much for that. And so back to Father's Day.
Yeah, I wanted the way I say it too is we can't defeat what we don't define.
Yeah.
You know, we have to be able to put our finger on it so we can say that's not true.
Yeah.
And it's just as simple as I tell a short story.
Yes,
a friend
please.
of mine, a woman moved into a new house, and just the smell and the furniture was already there, and something came over her, and she sat on the bed and started to cry, and she didn't know why she was crying. And so, you know, I prayed for her, and we just kind of let her have some alone time and all that. And it was God revealed to her that she became a three-year-old little girl at that point, because she was in her grandparents' home and where they died, and it reminded her of all the pain and the death. And we talked, we prayed, and the words, "You're not that 3-year-old girl anymore, and you have Jesus." I mean, she just kind of grew up from her childhood and you know, found the strength of the Lord. These kinds of things are, you know, they're really buried in our what I call here the limbic brain, or the trauma brain. And
they're stuck.
Yeah, and they'll come out, and if we can welcome them and see them as opportunities, you know, to grow.
And like you said earlier, you have to feel safe in that. And so if it's a really traumatic thing, and we just, you know, even unconsciously shoved it down in our unconscious and don't even know that it's there and stuck, it is scary if it starts to come up. And so I don't know, there's something in my spirit just wanting to just say that, you know, when we hear PTSD and we hear trauma, you know, back in the day, those were only things that happened if you went to war, to Vietnam.
It was only noticed then.
Yes. But it is a real thing. And, you know, I mean, you've done child investigation. What are the statistics of how many children are living in a trauma-based PTSD environment?
Yeah. One of the things that I want to say about trauma is we need to demystify it. It's any experience that just overwhelms us.
Yeah, exactly.
And it gets stored here because it bypasses our thinking brain.
Yeah.
They did a study that over 60% of all adults have had at least one traumatic childhood experience. And almost 20% of all adults have had 4 or more. This is addiction, prison, suicide, you know, sexual abuse. Yeah.
It can can even be like a roller coaster ride. My youngest daughter actually went on a roller coaster that, you know, I mean, I think she was like 7 or 8, and stuff kept coming up, and then the Lord started showing me and started showing her. At the last minute, she didn't want to go anymore. And, you know, whatever reason, her and her dad still went on it, and it was a super scary roller coaster. And the way that it was rattling, she felt nauseous, she felt sick after that. So we went through probably 3 or 4 years of, we'd go to the movies or we'd go to different things, and she couldn't handle the loudness, and we didn't know why, but she just had all of this, you know, trauma and emotion. And she's 24 now, and she went through a really big healing with the Lord, and he started bringing the kind of stuff and revealing it to her and showing her. So what I would love to do is, you know, I don't want to be done yet because there's so much more, but I would love, you know, I wish I had more men. I wish I was prepared for this, but I would love to bring my husband on, who works with men and is so good. And kind of like you said, he's probably one of the only people that I've ever met in my life that's super sensitive.
Awesome.
And he's so in touch with his emotional side, because he was actually raised in a pretty healthy home. And for me, I don't understand it, but I love watching him work with men. And so if you guys don't mind, I would love to just do another segment of just mostly hearing about you guys and talk about guys, and I'll try to be quiet and listen. Are you up for that?
Sure.
Okay,
sure.
perfect. Well,
Okay.
thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm looking so forward to sitting down with Jeff again. The cool thing about this book is you can get it on Amazon, and I love the fact that it's only $19.99. This book has, I've been through a 7-year journey, and every healing class that I have gone through, that information is in this book. And that's not to overwhelm you, it's to reassure you that I know a lot of us are searching for healing. And thank you, Jeff, for writing this. Thank you for your dedication and your obedience. And happy Father's Day to all you fathers out there. And happy Father's Day to you too.
Thank you.
Okay.